Hello everyone, and welcome to Fresh Master Channel. Today, we are going to have some story from Reddit. But before we start, don't forget to subscribe, like the video if you enjoyed it, and leave a comment down below. These simple clips mean a lot to the future of this channel.
Before Tom and Alice's marriage became a routine of work and trust, their relationship had begun with the spark of ambition and shared passion for engineering. They met in graduate school, both striving to be the best in their fields. Tom was known for his technical precision, a man of few words but deep focus. Alice, on the other hand, was vibrant and outspoken, often leading team projects with her natural charisma. Their shared dedication to their studies and the long hours spent in the lab gradually brought them together. During those early years, their relationship was marked by intellectual connection and a mutual respect for each other's talents. They would often stay late working on complex engineering problems, challenging each other to find solutions. These intense sessions didn't just forge a professional bond, but also led to a deep emotional connection. Tom admired Alice's drive, and Alice found Tom's quiet confidence and meticulous nature deeply reassuring. By the time they graduated, they were not just colleagues, but partners in every sense. Their decision to marry came almost as naturally as their partnership in school. It wasn't a grand romantic proposal, but a mutual understanding that they worked well together, personally and professionally. Both of them saw marriage as the next logical step in their shared journey. They envisioned building a life where their careers would grow in tandem, pushing each other to new heights. The early years of their marriage were focused on their careers, with long hours spent in the office or on site at various projects. It was a relationship based on mutual ambition, a shared drive to succeed in a demanding field. However, as their careers took off, the nature of their relationship subtly began to shift. Alice, being more outgoing and adaptable, started to gain recognition faster than Tom. She was promoted to lead major projects, which required more travel and public engagement. Tom, still dedicated but more reserved, preferred the technical side of engineering, content with his steady role. The balance of their relationship shifted as Alice's career accelerated and Tom's remained more stable. As Alice became more involved in high-profile projects, her schedule grew unpredictable. The late nights and business trips became more frequent, and though they still shared a bond, there was less time for the quiet, intellectual connection they once had. Tom, trusting and supportive, saw these changes as a natural progression in their careers. He continued to believe in the strength of their relationship, not realizing that the emotional distance between them was slowly widening. Looking back, Tom could see that the seeds of their future troubles had been planted in those early days. What had begun as a partnership of equals had gradually shifted into something more unbalanced, with Alice's career and ambitions overshadowing the bond they had once shared. But Tom, ever the logical thinker, brushed aside any concerns, trusting that their shared history and respect would keep them together. Tom had always lived a life of carefully planned routines. As an engineer, he took pride in being precise and organized, both at work and in his personal life. Married for 6 years, he believed his relationship with Alice, who was also an engineer, was solid. Their marriage wasn't marked by grand romantic gestures, but it was based on mutual respect and shared values of honesty and hard work. Alice's career had been progressing steadily, often requiring her to travel for important corporate projects. Tom, always supportive, trusted her completely, and never questioned her late nights or business trips. However, over the last few months, Tom had started to notice small seeds of doubt creeping in. Alice seemed more distant, and her travel schedule became more frequent and less predictable. Though Tom attributed it to her growing work responsibilities, a nagging feeling occasionally hit him when she didn't call after landing or stayed out late with colleagues. Yet, Tom brushed off these feelings as paranoia. After all, they were both logical thinkers, and he had no reason to believe Alice would stray from the life they had built together. One day, Tom was gathering fresh test data, a task he found tedious and exhausting. It was a necessary part of the work he and his team had been doing to develop the test vehicle over the past month. Whether he liked it or not, Tom had to compile and analyze the data. His phone buzzed with a notification, briefly flashing a message, but he ignored it at first. Several minutes passed before he took a break and checked his phone. The text was from an unknown number, local but unfamiliar. Initially, he thought about deleting it as spam, but reconsidered, thinking it might be from someone on his team whose number he hadn't saved. He clicked on the message, and what he saw confused him at first. A sexual image appeared on his phone, an explicit photo. He read the accompanying message carefully, You still have time at Bradley's 18. He reread it, chuckling slightly, thinking it was a case of a wrong number. But just as he was about to delete it, he took another look at the photo, and his heart stopped. There, barely noticeable at first, was a small mole on the woman's left leg. That tiny mole belonged to Alice, his wife of 6 years. In disbelief, Tom stared at the photo, hoping to find something that would prove him wrong. But the more he looked, the more convinced he became that this was indeed an incriminating image of Alice. He read the message again. Bradley's was a local bar, but it wasn't one Alice had ever mentioned. It was in the next town over. Why was she at Bradley's at 6 p.m. when she was supposed to be on her way to Boston for a big proposal? Her team had flown in earlier that day, preparing for a presentation scheduled for Monday. Alice was one of the team leaders, so of course she had to be there for the preparations. It was 5:15 p.m. Alice was supposed to have landed in Boston at 4:30. She usually called once she landed, but Tom figured she was likely busy gathering the team and their gear, heading to the hotel. He considered calling her, but decided to respond to the mysterious message first. Nothing clever, just what was expected. "Who is this? Where did you get this photo? Should I meet you at Bradley's?" He began packing his things for the day and made up his mind to go to Bradley's. He needed answers. He texted Alice, "How was the flight? I'm going to grab something to eat. Call me when you're free." His plan was to lay low and figure out what was going on. As he was walking to his car, his phone beeped again. Thinking it was Alice, he checked, but it was another message from the unknown sender. "I'll be there, but I'm sure you'll find someone more interesting than me." His head started spinning. He pulled up maps on his phone and quickly walked to his car. It was a 30-minute drive to Bradley's, and it was now 5:40 p.m., meaning he would arrive just after 6. He had no idea how time-sensitive this situation was, so he decided to head straight there and hope he arrived in time to confront whoever had sent the messages. As he drove, his phone rang again. This time, it was Alice. "Crazy day with the team. I'll call you before bed. Love you." Tom didn't think much of it. Their conversation could wait. He was far more focused on the meeting at Bradley's and how this stranger had obtained such personal information about his wife. His heart pounded as he pulled into the parking lot at 6:12 p.m. The sender hadn't given any specific details on who he was supposed to meet, so Tom assumed that whoever wanted to meet him knew who he was and would make contact. But the line about someone more interesting worried him the most. The sender clearly knew something Tom didn't, and it felt like a trap. But there was no other way to figure it out. The photograph had unsettled him deeply. He trusted Alice fully, and their relationship had been great. At least, that's what he thought. But now, there was only one way for someone to have gotten that picture of his wife. And in 5 minutes, he was going to find out. The weight of what might be the final answer filled him with dread. He stepped inside, scanning the dimly lit pub. Unfamiliar with the place, he paused by the door to survey the scene. In front of him was a large dining area, and to the left, a bar. He walked over to the bar, found a seat at the far end, and sat down. The bartender, just finishing up with a well-dressed customer, approached Tom to take his order. Tom asked for a draft beer and turned to observe the dining area. His gaze locked onto a man who had just placed his order and was crossing the room toward a table filled with smiling people. Then, Tom saw exactly what the mysterious messages had been hinting at. Alice was sitting at the table, accepting a drink from the well-dressed man, smiling and looking stunning in a little black dress and pearls. He was running on autopilot. Without hesitation, he stood up and walked straight to the table where Alice was sitting. He was just 2 steps away when she noticed him, her expression shifting from a bright smile to one of fear. Tom didn't stop. He reached the table, grabbed the well-dressed man by the hair with his left hand, yanking him back sharply. The man dropped his drinks and stumbled, crying out in pain as Tom pulled him past. Tom released his grip and prepared to punch, but the man's backward fall was too quick, sending him to the floor before Tom could land a blow. Tom took a step forward and recognized him. "Don't get up," Pete said. "I'm serious." Pete, who had been dressed sharply just moments before, now lay at Tom's feet in a disheveled, drink-soaked heap. He nodded, not daring to move or speak. Tom glanced back at Alice. The whole table sat in stunned silence. He recognized several faces. Members of Alice's team who had been over to his house for meals and gatherings. Maybe loyalty to the team outweighed loyalty to a spouse, he thought. But someone here knew the truth, and had chosen to tell him. He considered finding out who, but only for a moment, then decided it didn't matter. "I'm going home. If you want any chance of saving our marriage, you'll come home now. Tom said. Alice nodded and began to stand, but he raised his hand. Give me a minute to leave first. Before walking out, he turned to Betty Wilson, seated next to Bob Thornton. Betty, Bill thinks you're in Boston too. Bob, does Hannah know about this? They both averted their eyes, unable to meet his gaze or answer the question. Is the whole team really sleeping with each other? He wondered. Unfortunately, he now knew at least one of them was. The drive home was a blur, and Tom found himself in his driveway without remembering how he got there. Almost automatically, he went inside, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat down in the living room. He knew Bill Wilson and Hannah Thornton, but he didn't recognize the other two couples. 4 couples total. He thought about calling Bob or Hannah, but decided he didn't want to talk. He didn't know much, but one thing was clear. Betty and Bob had been lying. He decided to text them instead. He quickly sent a message to both. Just heard from Alice. Who? Looks like the team's travel plans have changed. Better check in for updates. Now they knew something had gone wrong. Whether they chose to look into it further was up to them. At least Tom's conscience was clear. About 20 minutes later, he heard the garage door open as Alice pulled in. He sat in the living room, waiting. She entered, still wearing her little black dress, but without shoes or jewelry. She seemed calm as she sat down across from him on the sofa. Tom remained silent, waiting for her to speak. He understood the power of silence in any discussion and intended to hold it as long as needed. It didn't take long. Alice seemed ready to burst. It's not what you think, she began. He raised his hand to stop her. You have no idea what I'm thinking after what I saw tonight, Tom replied. I don't need much of an explanation. We're both engineers. You know as well as I do that there's no single objective answer to anything. Why? That's just an excuse to explain bad outcomes. So I won't even ask why. Let's start with something simpler. How long has this been going on? How many times? How often? Do our friends know? Besides those other people at the table, am I known as the fool among your colleagues and friends? No, Tom, it's not like that at all, Alice said. We're a team. Our travel plans got disrupted, and instead of going home and leaving again tomorrow, Pete suggested we stay in town and rest before the next trip. I didn't see the whole team there. Where was everyone else? Some of them decided to stay home one more night and meet us at the airport tomorrow, she admitted. But you lied to me. You seem pretty close to Pete. Is there something between the star engineer and the prodigy program manager that you'd like to tell me about? Well, for one thing, Pete is fine. And he convinced the owners of Bradley's not to press charges, she said in an upbeat tone. Tom's eyes widened in disbelief at her sense of loyalty. I don't care about your boyfriend. If that idiot hadn't tripped over his own feet, I would have broken his nose. And by the way, I'm not done with him yet. Do you love him? Tom asked, and Alice fell silent for a moment. He could see her trying to gather her thoughts. Yes, silence was a powerful tool, and his mind raced to fill the emptiness her silence left behind. The quiet continued to hang in the air, and things weren't looking promising. He's not my boyfriend. Nothing happened. Yes, I should have told you about the change in travel plans, but it seemed so minor. Whether I was in the city or in Boston didn't matter. You weren't expecting me, and I was still focused on the team. All we did was have dinner before heading to our rooms. There was no reason for you to act the way you did. He just brought drinks. You completely humiliated me in front of my team. Alice was now in full defense mode, trying to act like Tom's reaction was the real issue. He calmly picked up his phone, pulled up a message, and slid it across the coffee table toward her. From her expression, Tom knew she remembered the photo and everything that came with it. There was no denying it now. She dropped the pretense and started again. Tom grabbed his phone, opened the voice recording app, and slipped it into his shirt pocket. Tom, our team, she hesitated. We're very close-knit in many ways, most of us. She paused briefly, then continued. There's a small group of us that meets regularly. Bradley had them all together. We were the ones bearing the brunt of the work to prepare the proposal. You know how much time I spent on that? I don't know how it started. It was sometime after Pete took over as lead. We worked closely, and I was attracted to him. And it just happened, Alice said. No, Tom interrupted. Sex doesn't just happen. You have to make a lot of choices, like taking off your clothes. We both know that, so don't insult me. She paused again. So, almost 6 months. He answered one of his own questions. That's when Pete signed the contract, right? She nodded. The team, Tom began again. All of you, he let the thought trail off. Are you all involved? She nodded again. Yes, Alice said. It was good for building trust in team dynamics. Is that how Pete convinced you to start AZEK's team at work? Tom asked sarcastically. Now you're being rude, Alice snapped. It's much more than that. I feel more connected to Pete and my team than ever before. Alice's bravado was back in full force. Tom had a sinking feeling that nothing good was going to come from this. Unfortunately, you'll be seeing some changes on your team, Tom said. What did you do? Alice gasped. Tom, if you tell anyone else, it's going to ruin more lives. Let them decide for themselves. We have to accept it. But I can't stay silent and be complicit, Alice, he replied calmly. I like Bob and Hannah, he added. A lot more than Betty and Bill. Anyway, I sent them a message saying my travel plans had changed. How your friends explain things to their spouses and how those spouses react is entirely up to them. I can sleep soundly with that decision. Tom, we have the most productive team in Gramerica Inc. as history, she almost yelled. And you've benefited too. Just because we had team meetings on Wednesdays doesn't mean you missed out. I never turned you away. You had access to me whenever you wanted. So I had some fun with the team a little earlier and you never even noticed. That photo you showed me. Do you want to know the story behind it? She mocked. So now, just because you know, and just because your fragile ego is bruised, you want to undermine everything my team and I have accomplished? Alice hissed, her anger rising. It excited me. Tom's heart raced as Alice continued defending her team and their actions. He was growing angrier too. On the drive home from Bradley's, he had briefly thought that if it had just been a one-time thing with Pete, maybe he could forgive her. But that thought had long since died a quick pass away. He didn't need to hear anything more, and he didn't want to. But Alice kept going. No, sir, you're not getting away with this. You need to text Bob and Hannah and tell them you heard from me, that we're stuck in Atlanta but have flights booked for the morning. That's the story Betty and Bill are using, and you're going to back them up, so help me, she shouted. There are tens of millions on this deal, and your little grievances don't mean a damn thing. Send the message, and then we'll discuss what happens next. What next? Tom shouted. There is no next. Are you kidding me? You, your twisted team, and your leader Pete can do whatever you want. We're done. I'll find a lawyer this week and handle everything. A simple 50-50 split. You keep your pension, I keep mine, Tom said firmly. Leave. You've got reservations in the city. Go to Boston, get your next big win for yourself and your team. Tom, please send those messages, Alice said, her tone softening, pleading. If we lose Betty or Bill before the presentation, the company could lose millions. You and I, we could lose tens, maybe hundreds of thousands in commissions and bonuses. Just think about what we could do with that money, just you and me. Forget about this misunderstanding. Please, Tom, she continued, don't let some baseless fears about casual Zex ruin this. Pete says I'm on the fast track to becoming CEO. I just need to keep doing what we're doing for a few more years. Don't you want that for me? For us? Alice, just go away. Tom barely got the words out before something struck him hard in the back, knocking the wind out of him as he collapsed to the floor with a knee pressing into his back. Don't hurt him, Alice said. Too much, she added. So, you're still debating whether my nose was really broken, huh? Pete said, leaning down, his face inches from Tom's as he lay pinned on the floor. Alice must have planted a bug on me, Tom thought. Now I know which side she's really on. Let's see whose nose gets broken next. Pete grinned. Take his phone and send the text from him. We don't have time for this crap. Someone pulled him up from the floor. Just one person. Tom deliberately pretended to resist, forcing the guy behind him to use more strength to lift him. This gave Tom useful information. His opponent was a weak office worker, already out of breath from the effort it took to get Tom on his feet. Catching his breath after being knocked around, Tom got back in the game. Unlike Pete and his team of well-dressed salesmen, Tom's team worked hands-on with the 160th SOAR, Special Operations Aviation Regiment unit, out of Fort Campbell, California. His group of engineers wasn't on the same level as those soldiers, but after spending time with the crews during test missions, they had earned the chance to assist with the challenging Pillsbury test, guided by some tough operators who flew missions in aircraft modified specifically by Tom's team. When these guys showed up, it meant serious business. If they were at your door, your days were numbered. Tom and his crew developed the equipment needed for entering dangerous zones, and, more importantly, getting out of them. Tom's team took pride in knowing their modifications helped complete missions and ensured everyone made it home safely. The 160th and their elite passengers greatly appreciated the effort Tom's engineers put into making sure their gear worked flawlessly. The most intimidating of the bunch was Staff Sergeant Troy Baker, a name well known to those in his world. From low-ranking soldiers to high-ranking officers, everyone gave him the respect he'd earned by leading his men on missions across the globe. Baker was renowned for his commitment to never leaving anyone behind, a reputation solidified during a mission in Colombia. "Stay close," Staff Sergeant Baker had told the young lieutenant leading the platoon. It was the lieutenant's first mission, and Baker thought he was doing well for a rookie. But when FARC rebels ambushed their team, the situation turned deadly. After they fought off the attack, Baker noticed the lieutenant lying on the ground, bleeding from a head wound. "He's unconscious," the medic said, checking his vitals. Baker crouched down and hoisted the lieutenant into a fireman's carry. "He's gone," the medic repeated. "Maybe," Baker replied, "but he's still coming home with us." The medic stared at him, incredulous. They still had 5 more treks through dense jungle to reach the landing zone. Getting themselves back was already a challenge, let alone while carrying a body. Baker caught the medic's worried look. "I'd do the same for you, Billy," Baker said. "Stick close, in case I need you." What happened next became the stuff of legend. When they returned to base, a doctor was waiting as the helicopter landed. The medic explained that the lieutenant had died. The doctor nodded, pulled out a penlight, and said, "Want to reconsider your diagnosis?" As he shone the light in the lieutenant's eyes. His pupils shrank. They rushed the revived lieutenant to the operating room. Baker was one of those guys who never seemed to age. He didn't talk much, but when he did, everyone paid attention. During the downtime between missions, he showed his appreciation to Tom and his team by teaching them basic but effective hand-to-hand defense techniques. "I know the biggest threat you'll face is a jammed copier or a nasty paper cut," Baker joked with a grin. "But if you stay in this business long enough, you might find yourself in some interesting places. So if you run into any unfriendly locals, you'll have a few tricks to rely on. But let's hope paper cuts are the worst you'll ever face." Tom worked to calm his breathing, leaning back into his captor, making him think he had control. He remembered more of the techniques Baker had taught them. "You might end up in a spot where all you can do is take the shots," Baker had said. "It sucks, but it happens. The key is to remember that even when you're getting knocked, you can still fight back. You just need to be smarter than the person knocking you." Tom leaned back further into his captor, passively resisting, sapping the man's strength. Pete stood in front of him, locking eyes with Tom. "Give me the phone, Tom," Pete said. "Now you know I've been sleeping with your wife. You're just a weak nerd. Do what we tell you, and maybe you can still have Alice when the team isn't using her. Hell, maybe she'll buy you a rubber woman for when she's busy." Tom stayed silent as Pete took pleasure in humiliating him. "Where is it, Tom?" Pete asked, spotting the outline of the phone in his shirt pocket. Here it is." He reached for it with his right hand. In that moment, Tom slammed his right heel down hard into his captor's shin and dragged it down to his Gucci moccasins, crushing the man's toes. He flexed his arms, breaking free from the grip. The man cried out, collapsing as his leg gave way. Tom saw the look of shock in Pete's eyes as he shot his right hand forward. Turning his shoulder as Baker had taught him, Tom delivered a powerful punch to the center of Pete's face. He felt a bone crack under his fist, and blood gushed from Pete's nose. Pete dropped to the floor as if struck by an axe. Tom turned around to see who had been holding him. It was Bill, lying on the floor, crying and clutching his leg. "I think you broke my leg," Bill whined. Tom stomped hard on Bill's foot, and Bill screamed in pain. "That should clear up any doubt," Tom said, turning back. He saw Pete on the floor, both hands over his face, struggling to get to his knees. Tom walked over, leaned down close to Pete's ear, and whispered, "Looks like your nose is broken, Pete. I'm just not willing to take one for the team." Then he punched Pete hard in the temple, sending him back down. Tom's adrenaline was surging, his breathing quickening as he scanned the room for Alice. At that moment, he felt a sharp blow to his back and neck. Dropping to one knee, he spun around, ready to face another attack. He looked up to see Alice holding a cast-iron frying pan. "Tom, we can still fix this," she said, panicked. "Think about the money you're about to throw away. I'll stop all the extra Zex. It'll just be you and me, like it used to be." Rubbing the back of his head, Tom was stunned by how quickly Alice shifted from one version of herself to another. For a moment, he thought of the alien from John Carpenter's The Thing, how it constantly changed shape to adapt to new threats. The thought made him smile. Alice misread his smile as agreement and moved to hug him. Tom steadied her with his left hand. After a brief pause, he raised his right hand and punched her square in the nose, not hard enough to knock her out, but hard enough to break the bone. Alice screamed and collapsed onto the floor. "It hurts, doesn't it?" Tom said. Your eyes are watering, you can't see, you can't breathe, and there's blood everywhere. Works every time." "Why did you touch me?" she cried. "Because I could," Tom replied. Tom's phone was still on and recording. While not all of the evidence worked in his favor, he felt he had enough to justify his actions. He quickly surveyed the room, recalling what Staff Sergeant Baker had once told him. "Decide when you can act, and don't move until the time is right. But once you do, give it your all, and don't stop until no one else is moving but you." He scanned the room again. Aside from Bill whining in the corner and Alice trying to stop the bleeding from her nose, Tom was the only one still moving. "You saved another one," Tom thought to himself. "Doesn't look like it, lover boy. And Bill will still make it to work on Monday. Too bad he'll miss out on all those millions in bonuses." He thought about calling emergency, but hesitated, knowing that once the police arrived, he'd lose his chance to question Alice. Walking over to her, he saw her sitting with a dish towel pressed against her face. Kneeling beside her, he showed her, "Pinch the bridge of your nose with your thumb and index finger like this." As the adrenaline left his system, Tom felt a sudden wave of exhaustion and sank heavily into a seat across from Alice. He stared at her, wondering where his wife had gone. The Alice he saw every day wasn't the same woman sitting in front of him now. How had she managed to deceive him for so long and so completely? "Was it worth it?" Tom asked. Alice shook her head. "It could have been," she said, her voice strained. "If you had just agreed. We were so close. After Monday, I'd be heading to the executive suite. This will set me back, but I can fix it. It'll just take time." "So, this is your dream? Becoming vice president?" Tom asked, disbelief in his voice. "What about us? The lies, the deception, is that going to keep happening?" "Tom, you're so naive," Alice replied coldly. "Pete saw that. He told me your rigid morals and Boy Scout mentality would hold me back if I let them. He said I needed to break free of your control and become my own person if I wanted to succeed." "Did he say that before or after he slept with you?" Tom retorted. "You don't know the half of it," she spat. "I tried being the good little engineer doing everything you said would boost my career. Want to know what actually works?" she sneered, daring him to respond. Tom stayed silent, still recording. "Fine. I'll tell you," she continued, her voice dripping with venom. "All those things you preached, they didn't work. I bent over backwards to meet every deadline, every budget, and all I ever got was a well done girl. It wasn't until Betty pulled me aside that I learned what it really takes for a woman to get ahead. Trust me, Tom, using Zex to climb the ladder works, and it's a lot easier and more fun." "So this started before Pete?" Tom asked quietly. "For a smart guy, you're pretty slow," Alice scoffed. "It started at the Christmas party the year after I joined Cramerica. That's when I slept with Art for the first time. I've never looked back." Tom's face twisted in disbelief. "Wait, you've been sleeping with Art? Art Vanderlei?" he asked, incredulous. "Yes, Tom. Art, Pete, Bill, and anyone else on the team who can help my career. Hell, even now if you think you've figured it all out. We told Art where we were headed before coming here. He's gathering the team and giving them a cover story about our absence. They'll move forward without us, but the extra effort we put in with their purchasing managers will pay off." "Do I even want to hear this?" Tom thought, but curiosity pushed him. "Extra effort?" he prompted. Alice smiled darkly. "You've always been proactive, Tom. Well, at the bidders conference, it was easy with the men, but we had to get a little more creative with Brenda, the woman on the selection committee. It's funny, I can even seduce a woman, but I had to bring Pete in to seal the deal." Tom's face remained unreadable as Alice continued. "If we factor in the promises we made about collaborating after the contract is signed, the committee is perfectly aligned," Alice said. "So, if everything was set, why did you and Pete resort to force to get here?" Tom asked. "It was Pete's idea," Alice admitted with a shrug. "Pretty stupid, really. I told him to relax, that I could come home, calm you down, and still make it back in time for the flight. But he wanted to play the alpha male. And now, instead of being the face of the winning team, I'm sitting here with you." Tom shook his head. "You wouldn't have won me over that easily," he said. "Maybe not," Alice replied coolly, "but I still would have flown." "Well, now you're definitely not flying," Tom replied. He recalled Pete's arrogance and realized Alice probably had a transmitter with her. "Art, are you listening? I think it's time I called the police. I'm sure there are several felonies involved, and we haven't even touched on the fraud." Tom's voice was calm and controlled. "This is a federal contract, isn't it, Alice?" he asked rhetorically. "Yes," she reluctantly admitted. "And the feds don't usually take kindly to extra efforts." I'm sure you have excellent lawyers, but there might be another way, Tom hinted, letting the suggestion hang in the air. A moment later, Alice's phone rang with a familiar ringtone. Hail to the chief. Art, she answered. Yes, let me put it on speaker, she said. Art's voice came through the speaker. First, let me apologize to you. Pete's actions were a serious mistake. I can assure you the board of directors will deal with him firmly, Art said. Thank you, Art, Tom replied, feeling a wave of relief. Glad to know you and the board take attack and fraud seriously. These are unfortunate accusations, Art continued. The lawyers will get rich, but no one wants to stir things up too much. We can pay the fines. Pete and Bill will likely get community service. But in the end, you'll get divorced and end up half as poor. Is there an angle to this, Art? Tom asked. Alice always said you were the smarter one, Art replied. But I'm still glad I hired Alice. Yes, Tom, there is an angle here, Art continued. Kramerica took your wife's loyalty, and when you discovered this and called it out, you were treated terribly. Disgraceful, unacceptable, Tom added. Tom, Art said, instead of calling the police, as you mentioned, we could come to an arrangement. I just sent a photo to Alice's phone. Well, not me personally, but one of my tech guys. It'll disappear after it's viewed. Take a look. Maybe it'll help smooth things over with Alice. Alice opened the photo and showed the phone to Tom. He saw the words Bank of Grand Cayman and a number, a very large number. And when will this be available? Tom asked. It's already there, Tom. You've got an email with your account number. It's been a rough day for you, Tom, and I understand you might be struggling to decide what to do. Emotions are strong, but Alice has been deceitful. Still, you can't take emotions to the bank, right? They don't pay. Tom nodded, mimicking Art's tone. Kramerica will handle the cost of your divorce. There's no going back now. We all know Alice will file. She'll demand her personal belongings and pension. He paused for a moment before answering. On one hand, he could take a principled stand, expose the entire ugly situation, and deal with the fallout. On the other hand, he could just walk away. Art had just given him 5 million reasons to choose the latter. Does Kramerica have medical personnel? Tom asked. Oh, yes, Tom. I believe we have several doctors, Art replied. Good, Tom said. You might want to load a few into a limousine and send them here for your team. So we have an agreement? Art asked. With Alice, Tom confirmed. Exactly, Art agreed. Are we done, Tom? Goodbye, Art, Tom said, ending the call. Tom took out his phone, turned off the recording app, and slid it back into his pocket. Alice, trying to regain her charm, gave him what she thought was her most winning smile. I knew you'd see things our way, Tom. We can still be friends. Friends with benefits when this is all over, she said, smiling, though her broken nose and blackened eyes ruined the effect. Dried blood clung to her face, dripping onto her chin. Tom found the sight amusing and allowed himself a brief smile. Once again, Alice misread his expression as approval and leaned in to kiss him. Tom extended his right hand, stopping her. Grabbing her face, he shoved her back until she crashed onto the sofa. Either I strike you too hard or not hard enough. What world do you live in where I'd want to kiss you, Alice? He asked, watching her look up at him with an offended expression. Take whatever you want, but don't be here tomorrow, Tom said as he walked to the door. He stopped beside Bill. Leg still hurt? He asked. Yes, damn it, you prick, it still hurts, Bill complained. Maybe this will distract you, Tom said, delivering a swift kick to Bill's groin. Bill doubled over, groaning in pain. Tom got into his car, not knowing where he was headed, but aware that food and shelter were now his top priorities. He grabbed a hamburger from a nearby cafe and checked into the Red Roof Inn just outside the city, close to the highway. He fell asleep as soon as his head hit the pillow. Despite the soreness and the countless, yes, at least 100 aches from the various injuries his body had endured, Tom woke up early and dragged himself out of bed. As he made coffee in his motel room, his phone beeped and he reached for it. It was a message from that number. He opened it immediately. Sorry about yesterday. I can meet you at the shopping center around noon. Take a seat at the bar. I'll be there. He typed a quick reply and then poured the lukewarm brown liquid from the coffee maker into a paper cup. Yes, I'll be there, he thought to himself, setting up his laptop. Time to handle some online banking. Back in college, long before he met Alice, Tom had an economics professor who advised students to always keep at least one offshore account as a rainy day fund. With nothing to lose, and with the professor's help, Tom had opened a new bank account in the Caymans. He called it his Love You Foundation. He set it up 10 years ago and added to it whenever he could, proud of the $50,000 balance it had accumulated. Now, his Love You Foundation was about to get a significant boost. Tom logged into each bank's secure website with just a few keystrokes and transferred most of Comerica's payment into his personal offshore account, leaving $100,000 in the original account. Afterward, he took a shower, changed clothes, and got ready to meet the mysterious sender of the message. Tom arrived just after noon. As he walked inside, a man waved to him. He looked to be about Tom's age, handsome and well-dressed. Tom walked over to him. "I think you sent me a message," Tom said as he sat down. "I'm sorry things turned out this way," the stranger began. "Why don't we start with who you are and how you know Alice?" Tom replied. "I was part of the team. I left the Army after 8 years. I was injured in combat, had a long recovery, and was discharged for medical reasons. I joined Comerica about 6 months ago and was assigned to Pete's team 3 months ago. I was telling a friend about my job and mentioned that I work for Alice. When he heard her full name, we realized we had a mutual friend, and he asked me to keep an eye on Alice as a favor. At first, everything was great. The team welcomed me warmly. Then about 2 months later, Alice approached me. She's attractive and persuasive, but when I asked about the wedding ring, she just smiled and said, 'It's fine with you.' I didn't agree and made that clear. That's when the cold shoulder began. After turning her down, I got stuck with all the worst assignments and constant grief from Pete. I told our mutual friend what had happened. He suspected there was more going on with Alice and thought you should know. Pete sent me that photo to try and recruit me to their little scheme, offering a prize if I joined. Let's just say I don't agree with their approach. I quit yesterday and sent you the message." "Our mutual friend, Troy Baker?" Tom asked. "If I hadn't met Troy," he replied, pausing for a moment, "let's just say he helped me out of a tough spot when I was a Green Lieutenant. I owe him a couple of favors." "We both do," Tom agreed. "What are you going to do?" the stranger asked. "Art pretty much laid it out for me. I could involve the cops, and yeah, Bill, Pete, and Alice would be in legal trouble. But with Art's lawyers, it would all come to nothing. We struck a deal. You might think I'm selling out, and maybe I am, but they took the one irreplaceable thing I had. If I can't make them pay legally, at least I'll make them pay in other ways. It won't bring Alice back, but I'm starting to think she's less irreplaceable than I once thought. I've got a trip planned. Tell Troy thank you for everything. I'm not going back to work." "And what about you?" Tom asked. "Well, Troy always spoke highly of Baxter Inc., and now that you're out, they might need another engineer. I think you'll find Baxter does things a little differently. The work's challenging, but the benefits don't compare to what Pete's team was offering." Tom smiled. "I think I can live with that." The stranger stood, and Tom followed suit. They nodded at each other and left without saying another word. On Monday, Tom had just checked in for a flight to Costa Rica. Tamarindo seemed like the perfect place to relax for a while, he thought. As he walked toward security, he spotted a mailbox ahead. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out an envelope addressed to the U.S. Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. Inside was a flash drive containing a recording. Maybe they'll be interested, he thought. Who knows, maybe Art's lawyers aren't as good as he thinks. He dropped the envelope into the mailbox and continued toward the security line. 9 months later, Tom sat at his usual table in a cafe. Anna, as lovely as always, brought him his cerveza. "Thank you, dear," he said, raising the bottle to his lips. He had just received some mail and was still holding the envelope in his hands. There was no return address, and he wondered who had tracked him down. While he hadn't taken extreme steps to stay hidden, finding him in a small town on the Pacific coast of northern Costa Rica required more resources than the average person had. His first thought was that Art's people had located him. He let the envelope sit at home for 2 days. He was sure it wasn't a bomb, but he couldn't be too cautious. "Carlos?" Tom called to the cafe owner. "Do you have a knife?" "Si, Mr. Tom," Carlos replied. Tom handed him the envelope and stepped back. You can never be too careful, he thought as Carlos opened it. Carlos passed the opened envelope back to Tom, and Tom thanked him. After another sip of his beer, he turned the envelope upside down. A few sheets of paper fell onto the table. He picked up the note. "Thought you might be interested," it read, with no signature, just a phone number, the same number. Troy would have the resources to find me, he thought. I can live with this. He flipped over another sheet of paper. It was a copy of a newspaper article with a photograph showing Pete, Bill, Alice, and Betty being led out of the Comerica building in handcuffs. The headline read, 4 accused of multi-million-dollar procurement fraud. Tom smiled. Maybe Art's lawyers aren't what he thought, he mused, a habit he had picked up since his Spanish was weak and English wasn't widely spoken around him. He liked hearing English, even if it was just his own voice. "Anna, another beer, please," he called, holding out his empty bottle. "Sigh, Mr. Tom." "Thank you, Anna," he said, accepting the beer, taking a sip, and gazing out at the deep blue Pacific Ocean. 9 months had passed since Tom had last set foot in the world of high-pressure engineering and corporate scandals. Costa Rica had become his sanctuary, a place where he could piece together a semblance of a peaceful life after the chaos that had turned his world upside down. The quiet rhythms of the small coastal town provided the contrast he needed to the frenetic pace of his former life. Tom had found solace in simplicity. Days were filled with the warm tropical air and the sound of waves crashing against the shore, while nights offered nothing but the soothing lull of distant tides and the occasional laughter of locals enjoying the sunset. He hadn't touched a drafting board or a computer monitor since he left, and he wasn't planning on it anytime soon. The betrayal that had shattered his trust in Alice and his colleagues was now a distant memory, one that resurfaced only in the occasional dream or when a news story reminded him of corporate greed. He had cut ties with Cromerica, packed away his engineering past, and closed that chapter with the knowledge that, sometimes, justice was not won in the courtroom, but in the quiet victories of a peaceful life. But, as peaceful as it was, something lingered. There was a loose end that never quite settled, something left unresolved. Despite the headlines, the arrests, and the millions recouped from Cromerica's fraud scandal, Tom couldn't quite shake the feeling that there was one more card left to play. It wasn't long before that card appeared. A small, unmarked envelope slid under the door of his bungalow one morning. He recognized the handwriting, neat and precise, the same as the note that had led him to Cromerica's downfall. His mind flashed to Troy Baker. The envelope contained another flash drive, a single piece of paper, and a simple message. "Thought you might want to see this." Tom's heart raced as he stared at the drive. He debated with himself for a long moment, standing by the open door with the salty breeze from the ocean swirling around him. He could throw it away, keep walking forward, and never look back. But his curiosity got the better of him. Plugging the flash drive into his old laptop, he opened the file. It was a video. Grainy at first, then clearing into focus. Tom's breath caught. The scene was unmistakable. A corporate office, tall windows framing a skyline that Tom recognized all too well. Alice was there, standing next to Art Vanderlee, speaking to a small group of executives. She was poised, confident, and smiling that same disarming smile she had once used to charm him. But what followed was far more than business as usual. Art began outlining a plan, a scheme even more elaborate than the fraud they had already been accused of. This wasn't about millions, it was about billions. The contracts they had manipulated were just the beginning, a small piece of a much larger puzzle. Art and Alice were plotting their next move, one that would place them at the helm of a global tech conglomerate with unchecked power. Tom sat back in his chair, the weight of realization sinking in. They hadn't been stopped, not really. Alice, Pete, and the rest may have been temporarily caught, but the machinery was still turning, their plans still in motion. His gut twisted, knowing that while they had paid a price, it wasn't nearly enough. Their ambitions were far from over. He watched the video again, this time focusing on Alice. She had always been ambitious, but this was something else. Her moral compass had shifted so far that there was no turning back. And Tom knew, with a sudden clarity, that walking away wasn't an option anymore. Costa Rica had been a retreat, but it wasn't the end of the road. As much as he had wanted to leave it all behind, this was his fight. They had taken too much from him, his trust, his marriage, his career, and they had almost gotten away with it. But not anymore. Tom powered down the laptop, packed his bags, and left a note for Anna. There was no goodbye, just a promise to return. But first he had some unfinished business to attend to. The flight back to the U.S. was uneventful, but Tom's mind raced with plans. He had learned a lot in the last few months. About people, about power, and about himself. He wasn't the same man who had blindly trusted his wife, nor was he the passive engineer who let things happen around him. This time, he was going to be the one pulling the strings. He would use the information Troy had given him, but he wouldn't go straight to the authorities. He needed leverage, a way to dismantle the entire operation without risking his own neck. He'd learned the hard way that the corporate world wasn't about justice. It was about survival. And this time, He was going to survive on his own terms. As the plane descended into the familiar skyline of his former life, Tom smiled to himself. Alice, Art, and the rest of them had no idea what was coming. They thought they had won, but they had underestimated him, just like they had underestimated the power of someone with nothing left to lose. This time, it wasn't about money or revenge. It was about making sure they never hurt anyone else again. And as Tom stepped off the plane, he knew one thing for certain. The game wasn't over. It had just begun.